Welcome, everyone. My name is Jamie Woodson, and I serve as the chairman of the Fish and Wildlife Commission. I'll go ahead and call our meeting to order. Certainly want to welcome special guests who are with us today. I haven't seen Boyd, but I understand Boyd is here. Boyd Barker is almost always here, so we'll look forward to him joining us. And also, I don't see Ron either, so I'll just skip over that. So we'll just keep moving forward. Today's committee today, if I could go ahead and ask our secretary to call the roll, please.
Dennis Gardner. Here. Angie Fox. Bill Cox.
Here.
Connie King.
Here.
Chad Baker. James Stroud. Bill Swan.
Here.
Kent Woods.
Here.
Brian McLaren.
Here.
Tony Sanders.
Here.
Kurt Holbert.
Here.
Jeff Cook.
Here.
Jamie Woodson.
Here.
Chairman, we have a quorum.
Perfect. We have a quorum. Do any members have any announcements that they'd like to make before we get started with our committees? Excellent. Well, as you all know, we'll have a two-day meeting. Today will be committees. The way we've contemplated organizing this will be Wildlife Committee, then Boating and Law Enforcement, and then we'll actually uniquely have a joint meeting of the Fisheries and Wildlife Committees to discuss a specific issue on a draft rule that will be coming before the agency in time, and then Budget Committee. We've got budget action in committees today. Tomorrow we will take action on any of the committees' work that occurs, but we'll have an important beginning of a conversation for our budget. I think first and foremost will be sort of a level setting on where we are with the budget. The agency's got a very thoughtful presentation to bring us up to speed, both new members as well as members who have been around for a while, to just build our foundational understanding of the budget, key issues that will be coming. So that will be occurring after the commission meeting tomorrow, back into a budget committee, but really welcome and encourage all of our members to stay for that meeting, because I think it will help you and inform your decisions as we look to the budget in our August meeting, and very much look forward to that. Any questions? Great. With that then, I'll turn to Chairman Cook for the Wildlife Committee.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. The Wildlife Committee would like to recognize Chuck Yoest, the Assistant Chief of Wildlife, to discuss chronic wasting disease.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Good afternoon, Commissioners. I'm going to share with you a quick update on chronic wasting disease. And you'll recall that, thank goodness, we don't have it in our state, but it is a serious threat, and we want to stay apprised of everything CWD. So over the next few minutes, I'll share with you some information. We'll review some general disease information that you've heard before, but it's important to kind of use that to set the stage for the rest of the presentation. Also, it reminds you of the regulatory environment, the risk factors in spreading chronic wasting disease, the latest developments in Tennessee and then also nationally, and then explore some options that we have not yet leveraged in Tennessee. With that, I'll remind you that this serious disease, it's always fatal, and it threatens the health of Tennessee's white-tailed deer and elk and the sport of deer and elk in Tennessee. And it now exists in 25 states and 2 Canadian provinces. If you'll notice from the graphic that the areas in gray are areas where it is in free-ranging populations, in other words, wild deer, and the areas in red and yellow are areas where it is in captive cervids, and cervids meaning deer and elk, so they're in captive facilities in those areas. Some of those have been depopulated, but some of those still exist. I want to remind you that the spread of CWD has been directly linked to the movement of captive deer and elk, so that's a big concern. It's passed through the environment or by direct contact with bodily fluids, and no state has ever won the battle. So it's really, really important because it can be passed through the environment that we do all we can to keep it out of the state. Because once it's here, it's here. Now, there is one success story out of New York where they detected it very early and haven't been finding new positives of CWD, but it still exists there. It's not bacterial or viral. It's caused by the misfolding of a protein known as a prion, and that misfolded protein, it replicates and causes holes in the brain, and that they're very difficult to destroy, which complicates matters as far as containment. The regulatory environment is you've got multiple governmental agencies responsible for regulating. You got the Tennessee Department of Agriculture, TWRA, and USDA. As you know, TWRA has authority over white-tailed deer, including those that are incidentally contained within high-fence properties. Ownership of these deer is with the state. Now, the Tennessee Department of Agriculture, they regulate live importation and live possession of captive deer and elk. So if there's a positive in a captive facility, then they'll be the lead on the response. And the third group, USDA, they develop guidelines for states that for their herd certification program. So if you have captive facilities and they're involved in interstate movement, there's a program that they must follow that is outlined by USDA. Captive deer and elk are the greatest risk factor in spreading CWD. However, nearly all the authority related to that is or rests with the Department of Agriculture and not TWRA. But there are some risk factors that the Wildlife Agency or it falls within their purview, specifically carcasses, how hunter-killed carcasses can be brought into the state, and then the use of urine-based attractants or the use of scent glands or practices such as that. Now to some latest developments in Tennessee. There's been some good effort on operational planning. So we've got the overall chronic wasting disease plan for the agency, but how exactly does that look in the field if we were to find a positive? And there's been some good work done within the Wildlife Division to learn exactly what infrastructure would be needed, how much it would cost, how long it would take to go live. And you'll remember these pictures from an earlier presentation, but this is some examples of such from Arkansas. So this is the kind of reality we would be faced with in a response, where we would have to man stations and find ways of efficiently destroying or disposing of animals as best we can to try to control the disease. So fair amount of effort going into that. That's a continual effort that'll continue until we're forced to go live if that occurs. Some other developments within Tennessee is that you'll remember the partnership with the TWRA and UT Extension Wildlife Veterinarian position. That job is now open and accepting applications on it through the end of the month. So before long, that individual will be selected, and that'll go a long ways in helping us prepare and respond. Additionally, there's a new effort to receive some feedback from subject matter experts at Cornell specifically on our sampling. So we've had an extensive sampling effort. Had a record year this past year, or the largest year in many. But we want to see exactly what are ways that we can improve that sampling so that it's the most efficient or gives us the greatest chance of catching the disease as early as possible. So that'll be an ongoing effort, and that's new information from the last time we spoke on CWD. Outside of Tennessee, there's some pretty sizable changes in regulations in Missouri, and I've provided you with a hard copy that I'll reference quickly from Missouri. And if any of our guests are, want to see this, there's some back on the press table as well. So with the ongoing challenges in Missouri, some new regulations that I thought would be worth mentioning is the mandatory CWD stations that they have during certain peak times for deer hunting, and then also a prohibition on feeding in areas. I think they're up to 40-something counties where there's a prohibition. And then they're changing some of their regulations within the containment area to remove antler point restrictions and increasing the number of antlerless permits. I share that with you as an example of life after finding CWD in a state. So you have a lot of hard choices to make on regulations, and Missouri sharing that they're having an estimated 50,000 work hours dedicated towards CWD efforts these days. So it's a very, very big deal for them. One other thing worth mentioning on the national front is some Canadian chronic wasting disease research that is taking place. The results are preliminary, and the findings have still got to go through the rigor of peer review and such. However, preliminary results show that there's a possibility that primates who consume meat from CWD positive animals can in fact get chronic wasting disease. So this is a major finding and something that we'll watch close to see how that is validated and what the final results of that research are. What I'll share with you now is some regulatory options that are still on the table. And these aren't meant to be agency recommendations. These are just meant to be informational. These are practices that I've learned of and other states are using to help either keep it out of a state or control chronic wasting disease. The first is to take the importation restrictions that we currently have and go a step further and require that cervid carcasses being brought in from other states, or that they meet restrictions coming from anywhere outside of Tennessee. I just want to also share with you that if that would be something the commission was interested in, that would require a rule change. Now, here is a summary of the importation restrictions across the country, and try not to get lost in the colors, but if you'll look at the descriptions at the bottom, you'll see that 11 states now require that these carcasses, any carcasses brought into their state, have to meet the restrictions. And then about 21 states, or not about, 21 states are in fact have the same policy that we currently have. And that is that if you bring these carcasses in from a positive state, that they meet restrictions. Other regulatory options that are available is to restrict the usage of deer or elk urine as an attractant, or maybe even scent glands. Another thing is I mentioned regarding Missouri is restricting the feeding of deer and elk, and in some cases this includes minerals, like the example in Missouri. And then considering restricting the rehabilitation of deer and elk by rehabbers. And I'll share with you that especially these three, that all of these would be opening up a can of worms that I'm not really qualified to advise you on. So if this is something that you all want to explore, I would definitely recommend counsel from our legal team on addressing these, because I share these just as options that from the biology end of things. So again, these aren't agency recommendations necessarily. This is just meant to be informational. So with that, I'll just review that you've heard more about some general disease information, a reminder on the regulatory environment, the risk factors, the latest developments on the disease, and then further options to explore. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Chuck. I'm just trying to put it together. I'm not sure I got this right, but just trying to put the two graphs together. I think it looks like Alaska, California, Arizona, and Louisiana are the only states that have closed all importation without already having CWD there. It seems like most states are retroactive. Once they get CWD, then they've closed it to all importation. But is that correct, that those, as best I could remember, it seems like those four have done it without having CWD there. Is that correct?
It's, as far as the actual numbers, I'm not sure, but you are correct that most of the time it's in response to finding the disease.
And it's too late at that point because it's there. At least, it helps, but it would be better maybe to close it down before you get to that point. That's rhetorical, but yeah.
Actually, to follow up that, so which states did it proactively?
I'm not sure. I don't have that
Would you
information
mind
with
as
me.
a follow-up to the conversation to
Be
help
glad
us
to.
understand that? That would be great.
Any other questions?
You talked about the urine base and sink gland thing as being an option. Do you happen to know why they didn't include that in the Missouri program? There's nothing that I'm reading here that says anything about the urine attractants or sink glands.
I will share with you this as being the states that have restricted the use of deer urine. So that's obviously not the case in Missouri now. Is why that's the case, I'm not sure on the details from that specific state.
Thank you.
I got a,
Mr. Cox?
I don't really have a question, but it seems to me, and I'm not sure when we're gonna discuss this with the intent of perhaps making a change to what we've got now, but it seems to me that the things that you've listed that we could do, that the ones we ought to be paying the most attention to are the ones that have the potential of bringing it into the state, which is carcasses or deer urine or that kind of thing. I don't disagree with the feeding, but since we don't have it, that has something to do with the spread of the disease, but we need to concentrate on what might prevent us from getting it into the state. And I don't think, we've talked about this a good bit, and we had a long, big conversation year before last, but it's important, and I think we need to really consider making some more changes.
I agree. Any other comments from anyone?
One more follow-up on the urine sink gland. Are there any federal regulations on the producers of that are being put into place to test, or is it even testable for the CWD via urine, or do you have to have blood for that? I mean, so the manufacturers of tinks or whichever you may use, do they have any federal regulations, since this is a nationwide problem, that are restricting them on what is their process, and are there any restrictions?
Well, the herd certification program that I mentioned before, the guidelines set forth by USDA, if they're involved in interstate movement, then they would certainly be required to meet those regulations. I will mention that the Archery Trade Association has a program that a lot of the lure producers are enrolling in, where they agree to not only meet the herd certification program guidelines, but then to even take some extra measures to try to keep CWD from being spread from their products. And that's a certification program that a lot of your major producers are getting involved in, but it's you know, from a wildlife management perspective, there are doubts or concerns, you might say, regarding the herd certification program or the USDA guidelines. And some of those same concerns are true regarding the certification, the Archery Trade Association certification program. It's better, but there's no guarantees, I guess.
And you said that's voluntary, that
That's right,
that's not mandatory for them.
right.
Chairman Woodson,
I'm happy to defer to other committee members. I've just got a question at the end, but.
Chairman Cox.
I'd like to know what we're doing, and this may be a Doug Markham question. Are we still doing anything on education, social media to hunters about CWD? Is that an ongoing educational process about, I haven't noticed anything lately is the reason I,
Maybe anything in the last probably couple months, but yes, we keep doing it. We just sent out, we got it, no, but yes, sir, we keep doing it.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think perhaps my question for the leadership of the committee is, I mean, it appears that there is almost weekly, it feels like weekly, more and more data and information, whether developments in other states, developments in research. I think it's very alarming. While we can't make conclusions off of preliminary research, but the Canadian study has got my full attention. It had your attention before it ever started, I'm sure, Mr. Chairman. And so I wonder if, given the increasing amounts of information, this is an appropriate time to reexamine. This window of time is an appropriate time for the agency and for us to examine our own policies and ask the question, given these new developments, given what we've learned, even in the short window of time in the last year to 3 years on the topic, should Tennessee consider a stronger policy? And I think I have inclinations about that, but I wonder if we could perhaps ask the agency to deeply think about that, but also to engage partners. I'm seeing Mike Butler in the back of the room, our partners with the Wildlife Federation, partners across the Southeast and across the U.S. That I know Ed engages with on a regional and national basis. Our partners with the Department of Agriculture. I'm struck with the big headline of the presentation is the number one risk is captive deer, which is not an area we have authority over. And so I think that it would be an important conversation among partners to visit with them in the department and just understand, should we be thinking in a stronger direction and reexamine our policy? And so that is perhaps my ask of the chairman and of the agency is to now that we've received these updates, to get pretty serious about either examining it and saying, yes, we're doing all the right things, or based on the new information, should we be more aggressive about protecting the Tennessee herd that we've all worked so hard to build a healthy herd in Tennessee. And so just wonder what that next step might be.
I totally agree, and I think we need to discuss all options available and, of course, work through that. But I think every single option that Chuck mentioned, I think, should be thoroughly vetted and considered. And just to expound a little bit on the primate study, you know, it's really no surprise. Well, first of all, it's interesting to know, too, that they only ate about 7 ounces of meat per month, contaminated meat. And then within a year and a half, up to 3 years, almost all of them have become positive for CWD. So that's not a lot of material. And really, it's not a big jump to say it wouldn't, well, they've proven it, but it wouldn't jump to primates, because the history of it seems like it came from sheep and all the sheep herding that went on in Colorado, that's where the service picked it up probably. And then also sheep herding in Great Britain is where mad cow disease came from, and humans have contracted mad cow, the human form of mad cow disease and the sheep form from eating meat from sheep and beef. So, you know, the study proved it, that these prions can do the same, but it's not a surprise. It's done it already just naturally. So we definitely need to consider every option and do everything we can to stop spreading the disease. I know it sounds trite, but you know, the best way to stop spreading the disease is to stop spreading the disease. And if we would just not, you know, spread the carcasses everywhere, that's a huge, huge start. But I think we have to consider all the other options as well.
Jeff, sorry, Chairman Cook. I'd just like to reiterate that I think it's very important that we educate our hunters and our sportsmen on this issue. I think if we educate them, then they're going to be on the same side. And I think if we don't, then we could be facing a backlash. And I think it's very important that we educate them through social media and every option that we have, email blast or whatever that may be. But I know last year we sent taxidermists a poster and had some things on. It was very informing. Heard multiple people say they had no clue. They always brought their deer back. They didn't really care. So it really informed people. And I just think even now, even though it's summertime, I think we should be doing some social media blast and just educating folks, putting some links out there to these articles.
Anyone else? Commissioner Swan?
Yeah, I just wanted to, excuse me, reiterate what has already been said here. For one thing, as we know, there's no known test to determine whether cervid has the disease or not. And so the urine from captive herds, I mean, there's really no way to test it, is there, Chuck?
You're correct that there's no USDA-approved live test, so.
Well, the other thing I wanted to add is, it's not that hard if you hunt out of state, because I do it all the time, to bring the meat back. If you debone it, take care of it properly. If you want to mount the head, skin the cape out, cut the skull plate off, clean it. You can bring it back fine. There's no problem whatsoever. So it's not rocket science. We really need to reach the people who travel out of state and hunt, and the people who hunt along the state borders.
Anyone else?
I got one more. You made, please, sir, you made the statement that there's no FDA-approved method. Is that a hedge that there is a method and it just hadn't been approved?
Well, there's trials trying to find a way to do it, and there's some folks that might claim that they've been successful, but until it goes through the rigor of verification, and our standard would be the USDA certification, and no live test has met that standard, so we wouldn't be comfortable with it as a recommendation.
Chuck, has there been any studies about CWD getting into the cattle herd?
I'm going to look to Roger Applegate real quick to see if he knows of any information. Is it okay if Roger addresses that? Thank you.
A couple steps closer.
Wow, didn't know I could do that. So the answer to your question is that no, but cattle, of course, get BSE, which is what they call mad cow, which is a prion disease also that's somewhat similar in some respects, but at this point, there's no indication that CWD itself can be put into cattle. So, and likewise in sheep, but sheep get scrapie, which is the disease that Commissioner Cook mentioned, that was sort of considered to be more or less the progenitor of CWD. So, and mad cow. So, at this point, it's kind of like in all the other situations, there's a lot of unknowns that are out there, and we're still learning, I mean, by the day, what's going on, so.
Thank you. Other comments?
Just one thing. If someone brings a deer in, carcass in, and it's not supposed to come in, it's coming in from a positive state, what's the ramifications to that hunter at this point? I just got involved with a few minutes ago, so I haven't read it yet.
I'll give a very high-level response to that. If it requires more, I'll invite my law enforcement colleagues to address that. If someone were to bring, I'll call it an unclean carcass into Tennessee from a positive state, then, you know, that individual will be subject to prosecution for that offense. More than likely, that animal would be taken or seized, and then depending on what the final outcome of the case is and what the judge's orders are on disposal, it would be handled accordingly.
I had a processor tell me that, you know, he turned a deer away. And so the question was, well, what happened to that carcass? Did the guy take it home, process it, bury it in his backyard, which is going to give us the same potential issue? And so that was kind of the, you know, I know we have things in place now, but I'm not sure how good they are. And this primate study scared the heck out of me. So it's something I do want us to be a little more aggressive on. And also, you had a slide that's not in our presentation. Could you get whoever updates our stuff to update that? The one that showed all the. Yeah, I'm color defective, but I did enjoy the color.
I'll be glad to share that with you.
Anyone else? Thank you, Chuck. Madam Chairman?
Great, thank you, Mr. Chairman. We'll move into the Boating and Law Enforcement Committee.